Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Meditation Mondays. Today, I want to share a little bit about Noah's wife. And when I say a little bit, that's because there isn't a whole lot mentioned about her. In fact, we don't even know what her name was. However, there is a story to be found in almost everything that's in the Bible. Now, you can find the story of Noah and his wife and family starting in Genesis chapter 6. And just to kind of set the story in case you don't know it, people were populated on the earth. Life had been going on for hundreds of years. I know in the Bible it always seems like when you turn the page, it's been a day, but really lots of time had gone by, and there were many, many people on the earth. And so what the Bible says, though, is that the men and women were continuously evil. Kind of reminds you of how things seem to be going these days. But it was so evil, according to the Bible, that there was literally nothing that was being there was so little that was good that it was perceived that everything was just evil. And so God was regretting having made humans. And so God decided, I'm just going to get rid of them all because this was a big mistake, and he was regretting it. But as he looked down, amongst his creation, he found Noah. And Noah was somebody who was extremely faithful. And it says that it talks a lot about Noah being faithful, walking with God, and doing basically, honoring God in his life. So God decided that, even though he was going to destroy the earth, and really literally not just humans, but all the animals, the vegetation, all of that, the birds, all of it, he looked down and he decided, you know what, I'm going to save this man and his family because he is so faithful. So lesson number one is that Noah, and we're going to find as we go through the story really quickly, that Noah didn't do things to please men. He did things to please God. Obviously, his life was a walking testimony. And his family, I believe, were equally as faithful. Otherwise, I don't believe God would have saved them regardless. But it does say that Noah, and back in those days, of course, it was very patriarchal, and men were sort of the guidepost of how things ought to be. So it speaks a lot about how Noah was faithful. Anyway, to make a long story short, God gives him instructions to build this ark that's going to protect him. And then in order for Noah and his family to be able to survive once the flood came, because he told him that it was going to rain, and it had never rained on the earth before this, ever. Okay, which is interesting because all the water apparently came up from the ground to water things, but it had never really rained. So God was explaining to Noah, you're going to need this ark, and it's going to take you X number of days to build it, because Noah and his 3 sons basically built this ark. Maybe his daughters-in-law, I don't know. I don't know how things exactly worked back then, maybe even his wife. But he had to build this ark, and it took a very long time to build it, and it had to be precise. So God gave him all of the dimensions and the type of materials and everything. So anyway, as the story comes to conclusion, the ark is built. He loads up all the animals into it, the birds, the animals, the crawling things, that kind of thing. They all get into this ark. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives all get into the ark as well. And God seals the door. And so then it rains for 100 days and 40 days and 40 nights and whatever. It was a long time. And but what I want to do now is switch to talking about Noah's wife, because like I said before, very little is actually spoken about her other than the fact that she was saved alongside her husband. So the question then becomes, was she just along for the ride, or was she his supporter? And I believe she was there as a supporter. I believe that his 3 sons and 3 wives had been raised to serve God, had been raised to believe in God. And though it doesn't say these things, God wiped everybody else out. So Noah was the standard bearer, but I believe that his wife was actually a true supporter of his. She doesn't get the notoriety by name, but she was saved, and he didn't do everything on his own. In relationships, it takes more than one person to have success. And I don't believe Noah would have been as successful as he was without her encouragement, without her help, knowing that his companion got to go with him when God saved them. Had to be, I'm sure, a true gift for him from God, that he wasn't going to lose his wife along with his children either, and their wives. Now, they're all inside this big ark with all these animals. And of course, it doesn't say a lot about how that worked out either, other than I believe that God handled it, meaning, lions and tigers were sleeping or something. Because it does say that every animal and every creature was on there, and not all animals and creatures get along. So I believe God just handled it. But I do believe that in terms of human emotion, human character, human experiences, life is always so much sweeter when we have people to share the burdens or the joys with. And it is my opinion that Noah's wife was integral to his success in being able to stay focused, to keep, making sure that everything was being done. Because you can just imagine all the wood and the chips and this giant, and I mean massive ark, ship, boat, whatever you want to call it. It's called an ark, but the size of it would have just boggled the mind. I'm sure the rest of the human beings on the earth were laughing and what is this crazy man doing? And of course she's going to have to listen to people ridicule him or not understand what's going on, even though it does say that he, when people would come by or whatever, he would preach to them about God's judgment coming. I think, Noah's probably hoping, hey, maybe somebody will listen and God will have a change of heart. But no one did. But Noah stayed focused and his wife stayed focused so that God's will was done. So of course, this is a very short story about Noah's wife, but it makes us, reflect on our own relationships to say, are we just along for a ride, or are we an active participant? Are we actively supporting the people that we have relationships with? Now, obviously, husband and wife is one kind of relationship, but siblings, that's another relationship. Daughters and sons-in-laws, because they were on the ship, or the ark together, rather. Everybody has a part in making sure everyone is safe. The ark and the salvation of those people is mentioned in the New Testament. Peter mentions the fact that they were saved because of their faith, because of this building of this ark, because of being in the water. All of these things that are sort of a precursor to what we know as baptism today. Everything in the New Testament leads us towards the story of Christ. And I think it's pertinent to keep in mind that the salvation on the ark was for men and women. It wasn't just Noah, it was his wife, their 3 sons and their wives. So men and women were saved during the flood. And the same can be said now in the salvation of our Lord. He opened it up to men and women. And so, anyway, it's mentioned again. Like I said, Peter mentions it, you know, and I just think Noah's wife played a valuable role in making sure that relationship was a healthy one. It is something for us to think about as we go through life with our Christian friends, brothers and sisters, with our coworkers, with neighbors. You know, do we tell them about the story of salvation as Noah did and his wife and kids? Do you tell the people that come around you, hey, by the way, the judgment of God is coming? Warning them, not wanting them to perish. All of those people, the rest of the people on the entire planet, died. Not any of them, only 8 people were saved out of all the people that were on the earth. And so you can just imagine if something like that were to happen today, as we watch hurricanes happen or floods, and we find out that hundreds of people have died, or even with this pandemic where hundreds of thousands of people have died, and yet there are billions of people on the earth. Well, 8 people were saved and the rest died. And they all did that because they had evil in their heart. They were not being supporters. They were not trying to help others be successful in their experiences in life. They weren't trying to help them learn of God's will and his judgment. They were basically just along for the ride. And again, I don't believe Noah's wife was. I believe she was an active participant, and I'm sure he was grateful. I know God was grateful. And after the flood, it was really through that family that all of us exist. When you think about it, there was not another single living, being on the planet. And so all other living beings had to come through Noah, his wife, and 3 sons and their daughters. And so, thanks be to God that he was merciful and forgave whatever Noah and his family may have had. But whatever it was, his faith outweighed the bad. So there's a lot of lessons in this story. I know, like I said, there's not a lot about Noah's wife, but there's a lot for us to reflect on in terms of how we are in our relationships with others. I hope you enjoyed it. As you can see, I have decided I'm enjoying my quiet space that I've created. One of these days I'll show you the rest of it. And by the time you see this, it'll be daylight out. But I hope that life is treating you well and you're enduring the time home. I'm praying for the pandemic to lift and let us get back to having those relationships. In the meantime, find every way that you can to be an active participant and take care of yourselves and be safe. Peace and love.